Hey, and welcome to the second part of the Viking tutorial, the coloring phase. When I'm satisfied with my sketch, I start selecting each shape that will be a certain color. So I'll put all the shapes that will be skin in one layer, all the shapes that will be his beard in one layer, all the shapes that will be a helmet in one layer, and so on. This may sound like a lot of work, but it'll come in handy later on when you want to adjust certain parts or certain colors. I know different artists who have very different techniques. Some like to paint everything in one layer, while others like to paint everything with selection masks. Basically, there are numerous techniques that work, and they all get the same end result. So this one just works for me. But feel free to try different things. As you can see, I created some dots over here with a set of colors from the same palette. Most of the time, color mishaps in painting usually stem from using too many colors or combining colors that don't really work well together. The easiest way to avoid that problem is by choosing a color, set different tones from that same color and stick to them. So you create a saturated version, a darker version, a lighter version, etc. until you have a palette that covers all the different tones. Of course, skin will be skin color, but as you can see later on in this tutorial, it's nice to have a set of color as a base. Okay, so as with the first part of the tutorial where I said you need to keep speed in your working method and always try to avoid getting into detail, the same rule applies to coloring. Don't start fleshing out certain parts of the drawing and spend hours and hours finishing it. You'll start making mistakes and you won't see the overall results you want to steer towards. So the best way to do this is by just quickly setting this up. Quickly set up the shades, the light, and by the way, I just use a transparent brush for this, nothing fancy. And when I'm done with roughly setting up the shadow parts, I soften them a bit with a smudge tool. You can set brushes to that as well. You can set brushes to the smudge tool and you can get really soft results with that. And this is the part where the color palette comes in handy. If you ever looked at the way light falls on shapes, you know that the environment influences not only the shadows of objects, but the color of objects and shapes as well. What I mean by this is that this Viking person is standing in a green bluish environment. So that means that his skin, the clothes he's wearing, is all influenced by the green bluish surroundings. By putting in a little green here and there, he'll match his surrounding better. He won't stick out like a cut out piece of paper, but he'll blend in more and really become part of the surrounding. Also try to avoid using really dark colors right from the beginning. It can really screw up your work, and you should try and build it up slowly and try and get as many different tones in there as you can. Because dark colors have the tendency to make your work look flat. If you just use black, it will be nothing more than just black. By the way, I don't mean that your work doesn't need contrast, because black can really put more contrast in your work, which is good. What I mean is that the darkest parts of your artwork shouldn't be just one single color of black, but it should be a variety of blacks. As you may have noticed, I did some jumps here and there to speed this up a little. It took me about 6 hours to get this done. So, I don't want to bore the hell out of you with a 6-hour long video. So that's why I made some jump cuts. Okay, so this has been set up and I can now already see what the end result will look like. This is the time to check any mistakes or colors that might need some adjustment. I like turning the pencil drawing to almost invisible so that it works as a guide but doesn't get in the way too much. Eyes to me are the most important part of any drawing. It doesn't matter how good your drawing looks, if the character's eyes are not right or there's something odd going on with them, people won't see the drawing anymore. They'll only say, he's looking funny, his eyes look weird. They'll comment on the eyes, because that's what people do. They always look directly at the eyes. I always put a little more accent on their shapes with a darker tone, almost like a mascara or something. Make sure they really pop. I constantly switch back and forth between painting and smudging to create soft gradients and make my colors darker and darker with each step. To me, that's a great way to build up your shadows instead of just painting it with colors that are too dark from the start. And when I'm happy with them, when I'm happy with the overall shadows, I start drawing in the actual dark lines to really bring out the shapes more. Finally, I start painting with lighter colors. By the way, I prefer to work from dark to light and not the other way around, because if you set up all the light parts first and then go over them with darker colors, they won't blend as nice. Light colors really need to pop, otherwise they'll just look dirty and saturated. And finally, I really use some dark colors to finalize the details. So basically, what I did on the face, I start doing that on all the other body parts. So the neck, I start putting in the shadows again with a soft brown. Then I start smudging it out, make sure it's all gets softened, and then I start the same process again, but this time with a darker tone. Again, soften it out with smudge with the smudge tool. Make sure all the colors blend well. As you can see, I'm gonna leave the green in there a little, even gonna put in some more in the shadow parts a little, and then accentuate it with lighter color of green and blue. The same goes for the arm. Put in the shadows, soften them out. Using the smudge tool again. I'm leaving in the blue and the greens. Use a slightly more dark tone of skin. And then paint in with the original skin tone. And then I'm gonna add the greens, like a kind of a rim lighting on his arm. This accentuates his biceps a little. As you can see, I'm kind of screwing this up here. I think I picked the wrong shade of green that I used in his face and the overall character. This is what happens when you pick out wrong color. What you can see happening is that it's not popping. It's becoming this dirty, saturated color, and that's what I meant when you don't want to work from light to dark, but always from dark to light. So I'm gonna have to fix this later on. I'm just gonna leave it for now and continue with the other arm. So again, set it up, the shades with a dark tone, bring out the muscles, and then smudging them out, soften them, and basically continue this process until you're happy with it. Here, add some green again. This time I picked the right colors. Smudging them out a little. Pick a lighter color for the rim light to really make the roundness of his muscles pop out. I do a lot of smudging, as you can see. I like having the muscles really pop by, you don't want to soften everything. You have to keep some hard shading there in order to bring out his muscles. Otherwise everything will be just blurred and you won't get any definition in there. This is looking okay. So the hands. I put a lot of my time in working on the eyes and the hands. The hands is another thing people notice right away if there's something wrong with them. It's just human nature to spot those mistakes, I guess. So if you're gonna pay attention to anything in your drawing, pick eyes and hands, because that's the stuff that people will see. That's the stuff they'll comment on. Yeah, this is looking pretty good. As you can see, I start using darker colors to really accentuate the shapes and the form of the fingers and the hand. Here's another trick that might work for you. As you may know, the hands and face of a person are a bit more translucent than other body parts. This means that they let through more light. You can see this effect when you hold your hand in front of a bright light. You see the blood in your hands and your fingertips, which makes them more red, pinkish. Your fingers will be more red than, let's say, your forearm. Now, instead of painting that in, you can select all the skin layers, duplicate them, make them red, and then set that layer in overlay. After that, you can create a mask for parts that you want a bit more reddish. Be subtle with this though. This is something that you only want to use very little in certain places. Don't overdo it. If you do it right, it can really do some magic for your skin tones. See? Translucency. So I'm happy with the overall setup for the skin. So this is the phase where I really start to put in the final details, the darkest skin tone in my palette. I just go through all the steps again, all the body parts. This time really trying to bring out the detail. Don't ruin all your previous work by going over it very coarsely with your brush. As you get more and more at the end, you also have to work more sophisticated. What also works great for your coloring tones is painting in the details and then just blurring them out, then repaint them again with a darker shade, then blurring that out again. And if you repeat this process a couple of times, you can create very fine shades and gradients. It's a lot easier than painting them in manually, without using blurring tools from Photoshop. Again here, also from dark to light. And as a final step, the greens from the surrounding area. So the eye white and teeth. I like using some grey bluish tones for that. I start out a bit heavy with the color to put in the shadow, and then making them lighter again using UV and saturation. Then the pupils. This is a really important step since it just needs to be perfect. Make sure he's looking at what he's hitting. Yeah, this is about right. Here I'm adding some rim light to his torso. As you can see, I'm not putting in a lot of detail here. Most of the detail is in the face, the axe, and later on the skeleton, because that's where I want to lead the eye. If you want, you can of course put in as much detail as you like, but I prefer to put in detail where it is important in the composition, so that the attention is not too distracted by excessive detail. Details are nice, but you shouldn't put in details just for the sake of it. It should add something. I skipped it ahead again. Basically, I like what the Viking is looking like, but he's missing some contrast. So there's a simple trick to fix that. I select all the layers of the Viking, duplicate them, merge them together, make them black and white, and then multiply or overlay that layer on top of the color and see what works best. Maybe set the opacity to 50%, maybe 30%, you have to play around with that a little. Yeah. So now I want to start working on the background a little. I'm going to add a little smoke to really get a spooky feeling, as if he ended up in an ominous tomb. As you can see, I'm quickly setting this up again without worrying about details. I'm going to soften all of this later with the smudge tool. I also think it's nice to have his axe swing through that smoke, so it gets disturbed by his sweep. Again, with the smudge tool. Here I use a brush that's great for creating clouds. There's really a lot of brushes to be found on the internet, totally for free, so with which you can achieve beautiful effects. Clouds and smoke are really the things where brushes are very useful. And again here too, from coarse to refined and from dark to light. So this is looking pretty cool now. I like the idea of other skeleton warriors surrounding him. That makes the whole scene a little more active and ensures that there's more tension in the whole. Because I don't want them to attract too much attention. You can set stuff like this up pretty roughly and keep it vague on purpose. Their role in this composition is decoration. They're just adding flavor to the scene. So if you were to work out every skeleton warrior, it would be too crowded and people would no longer know where to look. So basically these can be just silhouettes. That's enough. And lastly, the skeleton from which he cuts off the head. I think it would be great if there is an indication that he really takes him out, like some kind of trace of ghostly smoke that rises from his eye socket. Now it feels like he's really dead, which is weird because he's a skeleton, but again, I paint it dark first and then I start adding lighter color to it. Play around with hue and saturation until you find that sweet spot. Add some creepy eyes. And voila, that's it.